couldn't hear Krishna. You see? So because of all this, these are just the major incidents. There were many, many hundreds and thousands of similar incidents like this. Huh? I don't even want to get into like the illegal businesses they started, thinking that they were so smart they could do anything. So, how long have you been chanting Hare Krishna, Ronald? You know, I think in the beginning of Krishna consciousness, it's a good idea to distrust your own intelligence and try to get advice from your guru instead. That's my opinion. If anybody cares for it, my opinion. That's my intelligence. Based on experience.
Question?
Mm-hmm.
Question from Swati. Why did Srila Prabhupada accept such arrangement where these so-called disciples were managing his and Krishna's movement?
He tried several times to discipline them. And every time, because, you know, if one man can manage 10 men, but it's very difficult for one man to manage 100 men. And it's impossible for one man to manage 1,000 men. They simply outnumbered Prabhupada. They surrounded him, and they wouldn't let any communication in or out. I called it the saffron curtain, because most of these rascals were sannyasis, so-called. But most of them were actively gay at the time that they were so-called sannyasis. They surrounded Prabhupada. They wouldn't let any communication in or out without their approval. They became expert in forging his signature. They wrote letters in his name. I mean, what didn't they do? You know, it's not that Prabhupada really, there was a point where he couldn't stop them. They outflanked him. Prabhupada's alternatives were either go along with it and try to make the best of it, or walk away and completely destroy ISKCON. So he decided to go along with it and trust that in time the holy name would purify the devotees. Next.
Krishna Prakti. Why has Krishna forsaken Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON movement and allowed it to become so corrupt, even though Prabhupada is not physically?
That was the devotee's desire. They didn't want Krishna. One time, a devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, when am I going to see Krishna? And Prabhupada answered, if you met Krishna, you wouldn't like him. You can probably guess who that devotee was. He was one of those 11. That, in other words, you don't really want to surrender to Krishna. You want to be the boss. You want to be the enjoyer. You're in competition with Krishna. If you met Krishna, you wouldn't like him. You would think that Krishna was an enemy. You would think that Krishna was, you would be envious of Krishna. You wouldn't like him at all. So this is the quality of the devotees. Even the so-called leading devotees, or the so-called prominent devotees in ISKCON, they were very neophytes. The thing is, they had some leadership ability. And so Prabhupada used that leadership ability to build his movement very quickly. He engaged their material qualities in Krishna's service, which is what a devotee does. He didn't have time to purify them completely. And the devotees who were more pure, you know, I knew a few devotees who were actually pretty advanced. You know, like Pradyumna, like Santosh, Vishnu-jan. They were overwhelmed by the rascals, just like everybody else was. And there was something going on, something very powerful going on behind the scenes, which I'm not going to get into on a live webcast. But there was some interference from outside in the movement also. And that compounded all the problems. So how could Krishna allow it? Because Krishna is responding to our desires. And, the cheaters and the cheated. The cheaters want to be cheated. It's easier for them to give up responsibility and allow themselves to be cheated. So that's what happened. The rank and file in ISKCON, they wanted to follow somebody. They wanted somebody to tell them what to do. They didn't want to study Srila Prabhupada's books intensively. I did. And so I arranged my life in such a way that I could do it. If they had really wanted to study Prabhupada's books, they would have done it too. But no, they just wanted to be told what to think, told what to do, get up in the morning, chant a few rounds, take a little prasadam, do some service, and not have to take any responsibility. And because of that, because they were followers, not leaders, they accepted this. Because they were doers, not thinkers, they accepted it. Because they wanted somebody else to take the responsibility, they gave up their power to these other people, and those other people, unfortunately, were not trustworthy. They were the best that were available at the time, but they weren't really first-class devotees. So Prabhupada, you have to understand Prabhupada's mind. Prabhupada was serving his spiritual master's desire. And his spiritual master's desire was to get these books translated and distributed in the West. That was the objective. So as long as Prabhupada could distribute and get his books into the universities and like that, Prabhupada was satisfied. That was good enough. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to satisfy his order from his spiritual master. But what was Srila Prabhupada's personal desire? He writes about this. He says, so far as I am concerned, my desire is to help the Vaishnavas, the people in India, to realize what is actual Vedic culture. That was his personal project. So after Srila Prabhupada more or less guaranteed the objective of distributing many, many books in the West and getting them read in the universities by creating a large enough movement that made enough noise that the scholars had to read the books. They had to read them. It became part of their job to understand this Hare Krishna movement. Then Prabhupada turned his attention to India. And you know very well the last few years of his life, Prabhupada concentrated on India. And guess what? He built safeguards into the trusts in the Indian temples that would prevent the same thing happening that happened in the West. He learned from his experience in the West. I don't think Prabhupada knew, or I don't think Prabhupada could believe how rascal Westerners really are. You know? It was like outside of his cultural experience or something. It was like beyond the range of his credibility. How rascal Westerners could be. What?
Outside his ontology.
Yeah, it was outside Prabhupada's ontology. I mean, you know, Prabhupada grew up in Calcutta, and he used to say, we never got cheated in any of our deals because I'm a Calcutta man. Right? Everybody, especially in India, that sold temples to ISKCON tried to cheat ISKCON. Especially in India, oh boy. But Prabhupada always came out victorious because he knew. But I don't think he was quite prepared for how rascal the Western devotees were and how ambitious and how passionate they were. It was simply outside, off the scale. So he got caught by surprise in the U.S., but by the time he did India, he knew what was going on. And so he put very strong language in the in the legal papers of each trust in India to prevent exactly the kind of thing that happened in the West. And so it hasn't happened in India. It's really very interesting to see Prabhupada's response there. So why did Krishna allow it? Because the devotees basically wanted a religion. They didn't want a full-on, intense, esoteric, transcendental school. They wanted a religion, because that's what they were enculturated with in the West. Me, you see, I had encountered teachers like Gurdjieff early on when I was like 18, 19 years old. And I knew that what I was looking for was an esoteric school, not a religion. And I had those two things very distinct and separate in my mind. So when I saw ISKCON, I said, oh, this is an esoteric school. And at the time, it was an esoteric school.